Welcome to this edition of the Third Rail. I have a great guest today, a man I've known for many years, Pastor Shane Montgomery, and we're going to bring him online right now. Shane, thank you for taking the time to meet with us and speak to us today.
It's a pleasure.
So, let me pull up the two shot here so we can both be on the screen together. Whoops, that didn't work. Let's go back and do this. There we go. So I knew Shane years ago, but we're going to start before that. Shane, you were a missionary, and that happened when you were a member of Open Door Baptist Church up in Washington under Kim Blue. Is that correct?
Actually, no, I did get called to preach there,
Oh,
but
okay.
it wasn't until we had shifted from Washington to Vermont, and the church that we got involved in Vermont while I was working for Goodrich Aerospace. That's where God called us to be missionaries. It was Trinity Baptist Church in Williston, Vermont.
Okay. And about what year was that?
God called us in 1990.
All right. And so the Lord was leading you to become a missionary. How is it that you picked New Zealand?
Well, we believe God picked New Zealand. Honestly, at the time, we were convinced that we were going to have a ministry in America. Um, Being an engineer, I'd always been into research and statistics and so forth, and we had pretty much narrowed our focus down to either the Boston area or the New York City area, just because they're so needy for good
Yes.
churches. Um, which is one of the reasons why I took the job in Vermont, because it got us closer to that part of the country. And at the time, I was finishing my master's degree correspondence, and we knew the time was close. So yeah, we had made some trips, we had done a lot of research, but it was through the ministry of another pastor from New Hampshire who had been called to come to New Zealand that God really touched our hearts at our church in Vermont. And my initial response to that was, well, that's just God confirming that we're going to have a ministry in America. But my wife is much more sensitive to these things, and she said, well, maybe we should at least be willing to pray about maybe he's actually calling us to be missionaries, which I had not really. I'm a very logical, step by step type person.
Right.
Anyway, to make a long story short, through many circumstances, obviously prayer, obviously services, obviously just everything, God seemed to be directing us to New Zealand. And so to confirm that, if you will, I scheduled a survey trip that was in April of 90 to come to New Zealand for a week and a half and meet the other missionaries that were here and just see what God would do, what he would say. I only shared it with our home church there in Vermont, and then the church that my wife, each of us grew up in, one in West Virginia, one in Ohio. And those three churches immediately sent us money so that we could afford the trip. And it was while I was in New Zealand on that survey trip that God definitely confirmed that it was this very needy place, not many good churches. And it just, yeah, it was confirmed to us that this is where God wanted us. So we then I quit my job and we started the deputation trail and visited 180 churches in 18 months and raised our
Wow.
support to come.
18 months is probably a little faster than average. Has that been your
It is.
experience?
I hear, yeah, I hear the new numbers more like 3 years now, but honestly,
Okay.
part of it was I just packed my calendar. I didn't stay with a certain camp. um, One of the things we did, we just went to, I had a business trip when I was still working in Washington, D.C. So we went to literally Library of Congress, and this was pre-internet days, of course, and went through yellow pages of all the cities within a 4 hours drive of either my home church in Vermont or my parents' house in West Virginia or Debbie's parents' house in Ohio. And then I just contacted any independent Baptist church, told them what my goals were, and did it all by phone, of course. There was no email yet. Um, yeah, and so all of our supporting churches ended up being a 4 hours drive from one of those three locations so that our furloughs would be easier.
For our viewers who don't know Shane, he is a aerospace engineer by trade, and I'd have to say that's probably quite a lucrative career to walk away from to go out and further the gospel and heed God's calling. I think that's wonderful, and that you did that. Now you went out 18 months, and then you went to the Rotorua Bible Baptist Church as a missionary, and you were there for 12 years from 1993 to 2005. Is that right?
Yeah, we actually arrived in the country a year before that, and I took over a church of another missionary who was going on furlough. That was in the city of New Plymouth. So that gave us an opportunity to get acclimated to the culture and so forth. It was a very small church, but it was a good opportunity for us just to learn, start learning the culture of New Zealand. And then the church in Rotorua had already been established, but they were about to close, honestly. They only had 11 members left. Couldn't afford their mortgage. And they had heard about us and contacted me. And my initial response was that I wasn't interested because I really wanted to start a new church somewhere. And they asked us to at least pray about candidating. So, of course, we did. And it seemed, once we came up and met the people and saw their heart, we realized that it would be foolish to go start a church somewhere else and let this one close and sell their building and whatever. It was just a shell of a building that they had thrown up, but again, they couldn't afford it. So yeah, the Lord directed us here. I think I started pastoring in August of, could have been July of 93. And
Okay.
in those first 5 years, we went from an average of around 30 to an average of about 120. It was amazing what the Lord did.
What's the size of the town?
It's about 60,000.
Okay, all right. So that's a good size city. And for those that are interested in Rotorua, New Zealand, I'm going to post a link to a travel video that I found when I was trying to find out some information about that area. And you'll see how rough it is to live over there in that part of the world. It's absolutely gorgeous. But you talked about getting used to the culture. And how was, obviously, they speak English as their primary language.
Yes.
So how did that, of course, you're the one with the accent, not them. How did that, any issues with that, with them understanding your version of English, or no problem?
No, there doesn't seem to be a problem because honestly, everybody worldwide watches American TV. That's the reality of it.
Really?
And
Okay.
so most people are used to the American accent. I don't think our accent is super strong because we've lived so many places. It's not like, deep Texas or deep South type accent. It's kind of
Sure.
just a bland, but I've never run into any issues with that. When I say culture, and the language is part of it because their vocabulary is completely different. And so you have to essentially learn a new vocabulary for just about
What,
everything in life.
what do you mean? Can you give us an example of what you mean?
Where do you start? Just take like a vehicle, for example. We call it the hood, they call it the bonnet.
Oh, got
We
it.
call it the trunk, they call it the boot, and it just
Okay.
everything. We call it a two by four, they call it a four by two. It just the list is very long of just different words for things.
Do they call gas
And so,
petrol, or did
yep.
they call it gas?
No, they call it petrol. Although of
Petrol.
recent, again because of American TV, they're starting to call it gas.
Okay. 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 Yeah, that's of course I don't know the how New Zealand was settled. Obviously, they are of English descent, I would imagine, or Australian descent.
Yes.
They're neighbors, and so
No, not Australia. No, no. New Zealand and Australia um, love and hate each other, but they were both
ah,
settled by Britain.
okay,
Of course, Australia was settled as a prison colony.
right,
New Zealand was just settled as a place for farming primarily, and yeah, there was a lot of skirmishes initially with the Maoris, the original Polynesian inhabitants, but those got dealt with pretty early with treaties, and it was just because of the climate and the soil and everything. It was a great place for farming. So a lot of people from the UK shifted over in the mid to late 1800s and started establishing farms, primarily sheep and cattle. Um, Cut down a lot of trees and made it a farming country, if you will.
okay, okay.
And it was
Uh,
actually a British colony up until the mid 1940s when it became an independent part of the Commonwealth. So they still pledge allegiance to the Queen or the King, but they're a separate,
okay,
independent country.
okay. Um, that's interesting that there's a little feud between the two countries. That's interesting. Now you live on the. There are two main islands for New Zealand, and I believe you live on the northern island. Is that correct?
That's correct. The North Island is a bit smaller and warmer climate and has the most population because we have Auckland,
Okay.
which has now over 1.5 million out of the 5 million, and then we have
That's
Wellington, which is our capital. Um, the South Island is larger geographically, but much lower population than the North Island, and has snow and even has glaciers. It's because it's so close to Antarctica.
so. I've heard that, and that if you want to go to Antarctica, that you actually go and usually go through New Zealand. Is that true?
That is true.
Yeah. You look on the map, and it seems like they would go from the tip of South America, but maybe it's where they're going in Antarctica. It's better to come from New Zealand. But that's really interesting. So you said the population of New Zealand as a whole is around 5 million.
That's correct.
Okay, that's that's close. That's close to the population of the Phoenix area, I would imagine, if you can include all the suburbs. I know there's at least 4 million in this area. That's sort of mind-boggling. So they're sort of spread out, except for the large cities. A lot of folks live out in the rural areas in the country.
It like I say,
Hmm.
their biggest thing is still farming. Their biggest
Okay.
exports are come from sheep and dairy, and so that's still a big part of their. It's not a lot of industry per se, like you would have in America. Um, so yes, we have our big cities, which is the three big cities are primarily just Auckland, Wellington, and Christchurch, and then after that, the cities aren't but maybe 100,000.
So when you went as a missionary, and you obviously raised support, and you were supported that way financially. When you arrived in New Zealand, how did the currency exchange work? How did the dollar play out there? As far as was it? I know in Australia, it seems like if something cost $500 in American dollars, it's $700 in Australian dollars. I'm not sure how it is in New Zealand, or what's the exchange rate? What did you get? Was it more expensive to live in New Zealand than it would be here? I guess that's what I'm trying to ask.
It depends because the exchange rate can vary so much. It's amazing. Um, in the times that we've lived in New Zealand, we've seen it range anywhere from zero point 0.5, which means we get double the dollars in New Zealand dollars, all the way up to one, which is one for one, which is a huge variation. So, as missionaries, it's feast or famine. Honestly, it can vary that much in, say, a 2 year period to where your money is you getting 50% more, and sometimes you're only getting 20% more. So it goes up and down. Right now, I think it's 0.64, so it's like one and a half. So
So
one US dollar.
what would a one bedroom apartment rent for in your area?
Well, we do
If you can convert
everything.
it to American dollars.
Okay, so we do everything here in weekly. I know in America everything's monthly, so that makes it that much harder. Um, right
Just
now, to get a one-bedroom apartment, you're going to spend about 300 to 350 a week, New Zealand, which translates to about 1,500 a month. So it'd be about 1,000 US per month.
okay, so it's comparable.
Hmm.
Okay, so unless you live in this area where a one bedroom apartment can cost you probably $1,200 on up. Um, all right, very interesting. And of course, we spoke that the said that the language there, of course, is English, and the dollars. It seems reasonable. What is the main religion found on the islands? Church of England
Of
or
recent, of recent, they only do these sorts of surveys maybe once every 5 years or so. But the latest shows that the number one box ticked in New Zealand is no religion or don't believe in God. So that would be the
okay,
top one.
okay,
The
all
number
right,
one attended religion in New Zealand would definitely be the Charismatics.
really okay. Any
Absolutely,
particular
they have
branch of the Charismatics,
no
Pentecostals, or
all
Church of God,
branches.
or all branches?
We don't
Okay,
have Church of God here. Just your usual flavor, no
okay,
name brand charismatic church with the rock music and the tongues and the no expository preaching, the whole package deal. That's what's growing. That's where the people most of the people go. It used to be that we had what they call the high churches, like the Presbyterians and the Anglicans. We don't really have Episcopalians or Methodists here, but those churches kind of died because they were just old people and the young people didn't go, and a lot of them now are op shops or apartment buildings or whatever.
okay,
So it's pretty much as far as the Baptists go, we have what's called the Baptist Union, which would be very similar in America to like the American Baptist Convention, maybe.
okay,
Founded, believe it or not, by Charles Spurgeon's son.
okay,
But um, over the past 100 years, it has gone completely liberal. And pretty much every good sized town will have a Union Baptist church, but they've all gone, rock music, women preachers, speaking in tongues, the whole thing. They're pretty much just charismatic churches now.
So, is your church classified as an independent Baptist church,
That's
or
correct.
do?
We
Okay,
put that on all of our literature, on our website, and honestly, the average person on the street doesn't even know what that means.
that
They
was my
usually
next
have to
question.
ask.
Right. Okay. Yeah, they have no understanding of that, what it means. Um, that sort of makes sense, I guess. Now, how many other independent Baptist churches are on the Northern Island? We'll just limit it to that.
Oh, the Northern Island. Well, the majority of them are obviously because that's where the majority of the people are.
Right.
I think last count we have around 50 in the whole country, and probably 10 of those would be on the South Island. So that would make about
Okay.
40 on the North Island.
Are these churches that you ever associate with or fellowship with in any way?
Sure. Yeah, there's
Okay.
we have all the camps.
Okay.
So,
Right. Yeah, I think I
I
saw some
tend to
pictures you
fellow.
posted. Yeah, didn't you post some pictures about a camp or something just recently with your young people?
Yes, our church hosts a teen camp every year, and
Right.
then we do a family camp every year. But when I say camps, I mean like, American doctrinal camps.
Okay.
We have all flavors, if you will. But yeah, they churches fellowship with each other as much as they can.
Okay.
There's obviously different groups based on
Sure.
things like the King James, like music, Baptist Bride doctrine, those sorts of things.
So we like to think in America that we're really, hot stuff when it comes to our churches and our ministries. how important are and let's limit it to independent Baptists. How important are things like the Sword of the Lord or anything like that to Christians, Baptists in New Zealand? They've never heard of it, or is there any influence from our ministries here that reach over there?
It would depend on the church.
Okay,
Um, I would say, in general, most people who attend independent Baptist churches here aren't aware of most of those things.
okay,
But with the internet, they can obviously get on and research and find people of like faith. But it's not a big influence in any way. No.
okay, okay. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Um, so that's interesting. So for our viewers who are wondering why I'm talking to a man who's in New Zealand right now, it's because of his story. It's so unique, and I've titled this. I haven't really, as we're speaking right now, I haven't firmed up on the title, but I will by the time this is posted and you see it. So why am I talking to Shane Montgomery? Because he is an interesting man who, number one, you heard that he's an aerospace engineer who followed the calling of God to leave that and to travel around the world to minister where people needed to hear the gospel. Amen. That's tremendous. Now, how I got to know him, this is what's really interesting to me. I live here in Arizona. Casa Grande is a city that's about 40 minutes south of Phoenix. And the church that I was attending back in the day, we were talk about Casa Grande and that they needed, there was no, at that time, really much of any kind of a decent church, a Bible believing, Bible preaching church. And so, in conjunction with our church and our pastor, I contacted the local paper in Casa Grande and I put an ad in the paper. If anyone is interested in starting a new independent Baptist church, let me know. Now, at that time, I was working a secular job as my background then, and still is, as an electronic technician. I was in my truck for the company that I work for, driving down the 202, and I can almost remember this like it was yesterday. And all of a sudden, my phone rings, and I'm driving, and my cell phone. So I pick it up. Hello. And there's this guy on the other end of the phone, and he's asking me questions about this starting a church in Casa Grande. And he's asking me questions that the ad answered. And I'm like, okay, that was in the ad. I mean, I was confused. And then he told me who he was, and it was Shane Montgomery. And Shane Montgomery was in New Zealand. And Shane Montgomery had been feeling led of the Lord to come to Casa Grande to start an independent Baptist church. So he heard either, I don't remember, you can fill in the blanks. I don't remember if you read the ad yourself or you just heard about it or somebody told you about it or what. But, and when he told me that, and I'm driving the truck, trying not to wreck it on the road because I was excited about somebody halfway around the world wanting to come to the very town that we had been praying about starting a church in because there wasn't one. I was like, wow. And so, it was amazing. And I said, brother, if you want to come, yeah, amen. We're out of it. You come, you do it. We just know that there was a need. So take us from there. Tell us how it is. You're a missionary in New Zealand, 12 years. And all of a sudden, God lays it on your heart to come back to America, to go to some town in the desert where it's hot and start a brand new Baptist church. Tell us about that. How did that happen?
Well, it was a process, obviously, probably a year process, but it started with my wife's hip, which was really, really bad. It had gotten to the point where she could barely walk. And we just, at that point, doing the research, realized that hotness was actually probably a good thing. It's quite humid here in New Zealand. It gets
Okay.
pretty cold in the winter and so forth. So the climate was a factor. Secondly, the goals that we had set out for our church here in Rotorua, which were pretty lofty goals. Um, we had been told over and over again, especially when we were on deputation, that it would be impossible to ever have an independent Baptist church in this country over 100. And at the time, we were running about 160 and had just every possible ministry you can imagine. We had a Bible college, we had a Christian school, and really we had met all of our goals. And so we knew it was time to do something else. So for us, it was a matter of finding someone to take this ministry, and then trying to find some place where the weather was hot and dry.
How did you pick
So as
Casa
I
Grande?
mentioned earlier, well, that's yeah. I literally spent months doing research. First, I guess the first criteria was climate, and then after I determined where the climate was what we were after, then I started researching. Well, where are the churches, the independent Baptist churches, and as I found where they were and where they weren't, I picked what I believed to be the biggest city, which Casa Grande is about 60,000. The biggest city that I could find where it was hot and dry that didn't have an independent Baptist church. So that's how I zeroed in on it.
And how is it
And I
that
don't
you
remember
found out to call me? Do you remember that?
don't remember that. I think someone told me about it, but
Okay.
it could have been. I can't remember now. But
Yeah, it's been a long time
yeah,
ago.
I thought that was a long time ago. That's
It
what,
was.
17, 18 years ago. So we left this church to another American missionary who had been in Hamilton. And honestly, when we came to Arizona, our intent was to plant a church there and pretty much, if you will, finish our days in the desert.
Okay. All right. You pronounce it now, just so that our folks know. Some people pronounce it Casa Grande, or as he said, and I think it's probably more correct, Casa Grande. There's an E on the end of that. And if I don't know if I'll be able to find the link. I'm sure I could. I could put it in the description. The name of the city is based over a federal park where there's an actual two-story prehistoric building. Casa Grande means what? Large house, and
Big house, yeah.
big house, and that's what it's for. Is this park? I've seen the house when you drive down the highway. It's down by Coolidge, but
Right.
I've never been to the park. But that's it's very interesting. That building structure is very interesting. So okay, so those are great reasons to come to Arizona, and how you picked the Casa Grande. And so you came in what year? What that was around 2005, 2006, 2005,
2005.
2005. Okay, so and I think I'm not sure how long you were there. I tried. I was sure. I had some photos. You had first started in a storefront, and we had
Correct.
visited there, and I thought I had pictures. I could not find them. Of course, my cataloging for photos is horrible. But you were in that storefront in Casa Grande for how long before you moved to the next building?
I believe it was about 2 years we were in the storefront.
Okay. Now
And then in the course of that, we there was a Southern Baptist church that our people, many of our church had grown. We know we were probably running around 30 by then. And some of our people would constantly drive by a Southern Baptist church that was on one of the main roads. And every time they would drive by on their way to our church, they would notice that there were no cars in the car park. I mean, the parking
yeah,
lot. And so they just noted that and told me about it. And I thought, well, I could at least give the guy a ring. So I tracked down the preacher, and he explained that they were actually, their services were at 2 o'clock because he worked a secular job. I think he worked for one of the cell phone companies. It's like a tech or something. And so I said, well, then if you meet at 2 o'clock and that's your only service, what would be the possibility of us also meeting there and renting your facilities and, having the standard 10, 11 evening service type of thing? And he said, well, we've had many churches over the years approach us about renting our building, and we've really not been interested. But since you're Baptist, I'll take it to my people, and they did. And anyway, to make a long story short, that's where we moved to and rented
Right.
that,
Right. Now, when
and
you
that
came,
was perfect location.
yeah, let me ask, when you came back, now you were still a missionary receiving support while you were in New Zealand. When you came back, were you still receiving support when you started this new work in Casa Grande?
I told all of my churches what I was doing. At the time, we had about 50 supporting churches in New Zealand, and I pretty much left it up to them. I told them my plans, that I was going to start a church in Casa Grande, Arizona. And I think initially we lost about half of our churches, and then that began to dwindle. Honestly, it wasn't enough to live on, so I found jobs, to pay our bills. And even though I was an engineer, it was tough to find that sort of a job initially. I think I worked on roofs for a while, then I drove a school bus for a year, whatever I could find. And then when I was able to get back into a decent salary, then I contacted the few churches that still supported us and told them, that I really didn't need support anymore because I was making a decent salary, and the church in Casa Grande had gotten to the point where it could pay me a tiny bit. And so, yeah, then we stopped being missionaries. That was probably around 2008 or 2009.
Okay. I have some photos here I want to show you. These are of your charter service in the new building, the one that you're renting from the Southern Baptist. We show that here. And it was a nice little building. It had a nice parking lot,
Yes.
a lot of room. And here's another photograph of you and your dear wife and Brother Newell.
And
Now,
Brother Newell.
Brother Newell, I've met Brother Newell many times. I would visit your church. Sometimes I'd fill in for you when you were gone. I'll tell this story about Brother Newell was a World War II veteran. He was disabled. He had injury to his hand. Was it frostbite to his hand? Was that the problem?
And his feet,
Right.
and
Okay.
then his spine.
Whoops.
Had
That
some
didn't work
spine
out right.
issues too.
Yeah. And then I've got one other photo here I'll show you. But speaking about Brother Newell, so I don't remember the timing. One week I came down and preached, and we were done. And the next time I came down, of course, you were gone. And Brother Newell, he was a let's see, how can we say it? He was firm. He was firm, and you
He was definitely firm.
didn't want to mess with Brother Newell. And when I got up to preach the next time I was there, he said, "Brother Petticord, just so you remember, our services are over at such and such a time," because the time before I'd gone over, and he just gently, no, not gently, strongly reminded me, "Brother, this is when we quit around here, okay?" And so I got to, of course, yes, sir. Yes, sir, of course. And for all you out there that think that I was a compromiser or something because I'm letting somebody tell me how to preach, you haven't met Brother Newell, all right? I trembled in the presence of the man. So tell us how you became acquainted with him. Here's another
He
picture of your
was
charter service.
he was one of the assistant pastors when we were at Open Door Baptist Church in Linwood, Washington, which is a long time ago, early '80s. And in I think it was 2000, or it might have been around 2000. We decided to upgrade our Bible Institute to a proper Bible college and called it Timothy Baptist College. And I put in one of my prayer letters, and that we were going to do this, and that we could, if there was anyone out there who wanted to come help establish the Bible college, that'd be wonderful. Just kind of threw it out there and trust the Lord. So Brother Newell contacted me, Um, and so he at that time would have been 80. I think he was 80, maybe 81. I can't remember. So anyway, he contacted me and said, "Brother, I'm willing to come over to New Zealand. I get a good pension from the military and from my job working at the power company, and I don't need any support, so I'll support myself, and I'm happy to come for a couple of years and help you establish the Bible college." So he said, "But I got to tell you up front that I'm 80 years old." And I just said, "Well, that's how old Caleb was when he said, 'Give me that mountain.' So if you're willing to come, brother, we'll use you." And up to that point, we knew them. He and his wife, she was gone by then, but we knew them as a couple, like I say, uh, 15 years before, not as but best friends type of thing. But yeah, so he came over and got a little house to live in and became part of our church here in Rotorua. And then when we told him our plans that we were praying about to maybe go back and start a church in Arizona, he said, "Well, can I go with you?" Because he had no family, they didn't have children. His health was going down. And I said, "Well, of course." And so he came with us and he got an apartment in Casa Grande. But then over time, his health kept getting worse. Eventually went into a home, which he hated. So eventually then we sold our house and bought a different house that was bigger so he could live with us, and he had his own bedroom with ensuite downstairs because by then he was in a wheelchair. And then he
Yeah.
went on to be with Jesus about 3 years after moving in with us. I can't remember the exact dates, but I think it was around 2014.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a picture somewhere. I didn't bring it, but we attended the service at the church, and he was something else. He really was. I'm honored to have known him, and so you're in Casa Grande. You've got the church. You've started it. The Lord's given you people, given you a good building, a good location, and so forth. And then the next step. This is really unusual. I can't think of anybody else this has ever happened to.
I
Did you get
can't
a
either.
phone call? Yeah. Did you get a phone call? Did you get an email? Did you get a? I mean, how did this happen? Where you got called by the church in New Zealand that you were once a missionary to, and now tell us the rest of the story.
So, yeah, we had been in Casa Grande by now for about 10 years. Um, it was never a big church. It's still going now, and it's still, I think, around the same size, 30 or 40. But we actually were on the mailing list for the prayer letters for the man that I turned the church over to, um, for via email, and the email said that they were planning to um, move out of Rotorua and start a church in another city about 5 hours away, which was complete shock to us. We had pretty much tried to take a hands-off approach to Rotorua, because I wasn't the pastor there anymore. So that was amazing to us. And honestly, I went through a cancer battle in 2013. And in the course of that and surviving it, my wife and I both realized that we really missed New Zealand. And I had actually started to look. I told her, Debbie, I said, "There's just no way I'm going to do deputation again. I'm too old." So I had started looking for jobs, honestly, in the Hawke's Bay area, which has like 120,000 people and didn't have a decent church. But there was just nothing that suited my background. It's like I say, technology isn't really the thing here, and industry and so forth. So we were just plugging along, trusting the Lord, and then this prayer letter came, and so I contacted one of our good friends who was one of the deacons here in this church, and just asked him, what was next for the church, and he didn't know. that this pastor was planning to leave. So I opened
Oh,
the Pandora's box. Bill.
oh, they did not
I
know
don't
he
know
was
why he would
leaving.
put it in a prayer letter. Yeah, I mean, this prayer letter obviously went to hundreds of people. So I don't know why he would put it in a prayer letter but not tell the church, but that's how it went.
Okay.
So that was early 2015, and then um, really not much after that for months. And then the same deacon called me back and said, I'm part of the pulpit committee. Um, our pastor said he's definitely leaving at the end of the year, and we we've evaluated his son, who was at that time the assistant pastor, and we just aren't comfortable that he's ready. And so we wanted to ask you to pray about coming back, which we could have never imagined coming back to Rotorua. I mean, it just was never going to be a possibility. As far as we knew, the guy was going to take the church forever. But
Hmm.
that's kind of how it went, and that was about a year long thing. So I then had to obviously go through the process of helping Casa Grande to find a pastor, which that was a beautiful story. One of our missionaries that we were supporting, who was on deputation to go to Sudan, who was one of the fill-in preachers like yourself. Matt Witter was his name, and the people just said, if you're going to contact people, start with him because we love his preaching. And so I did, not knowing what he said. Well, brother, you can't believe it, but we just this week decided that God doesn't want us in Sudan, that we're going to stay in America. And to make a long story short, he
Hmm.
came, he candidated, and the people loved it and voted him to be the guy to take my place.
It
He's
sounds
still
like
there.
all these things going on. It sounds like God knows what He's doing. But the
Amen. We
secret the
sure
secret
know.
to but the secret to this is God knows what He wants, and He knows but He has to have people that are willing to do what He wants. And in this
Yes.
circumstance, it seems like it all worked out. That it was just according to His plan. It's actually it's miraculous in a way, and just amazing because I just don't know anybody else that's ever been through that. Started off as a missionary in a foreign country, decided to come back to America, start a church from scratch, plugging along, doing it, getting it done, and then get contacted by the church back there, and and saying come back. And now, of course, you go back, and you're not a missionary. They support you financially themselves. Is that correct?
Right. That's one of the things that I stipulated. I told them, I said, listen, if I do come back, and it's obviously up to the pulpit committee, and um, I said, if I do come back, then I'm not coming back as a missionary. The church has been there long enough. It's mature enough that it's time to stop living off American money. It's time to start paying the pastor. That's biblical. And they looked at their finances and said, well, we aren't sure we can afford to do that, but we'll give it our best shot. And yeah, that first year was pretty tight because the church had really gone down numerically. Thankfully, they had finished paying the mortgage, so they didn't have that burden. But what's fascinating is how the Lord just honors when we do the right thing. And so
Hmm.
the church
Amen.
said, yes, we'll pay you. And they set out with a salary that was very low in American dollars, but we just said we'll trust the Lord, and we did. And within 2 years, not only had the church been paying a pastor, which they had never done, and increased my salary after the first year, but we had like $30,000 in the bank.
So when you're talking about the money and obviously moving from the United States to New Zealand, and you've done it now twice, is not cheap. Did they
No,
did they help you with that?
they helped us with a few things. They put us up in a like a B&B for a week so that we could
Okay.
look for a place to rent. And then they also kindly bought us a new washer and dryer,
Okay.
which they're quite expensive here to go into whatever house we found. Um, but like you say, the move itself, by the time you, because we had to weigh based on what we knew about the whole situation, do we sell everything and go back and rebuy everything, or do we take our stuff with us? That's always a big trade off. And here, things like furniture and stuff like that is just so much more, even if you convert it. And so we made the decision just to bring it all with us, obviously, except for electrical appliances, which you can't bring because of the different power.
Right.
But yeah, all of our furniture, the piano, beds, we just hired a container, 40-foot container, and shipped it all over here. But I think last tally between tickets and everything else and container and all that, it was like $15,000.
Wow. It's incredible. But somehow you
But
survived. God has
thankfully,
provided for
I had
you.
a decent job. Well, I had a decent job in Honeywell. The Church of Costa Grande was paying me a little, and honestly, the year before all this happened, I changed from Phoenix to the Tucson division of Honeywell Aerospace, and my boss in Tucson was a born again Christian, and all he wanted to do was talk about the Lord, and it was just beautiful. And when I told him what I was going to do, he said, "Well, I want to help, so let's set it up so you can work from home for your first few months in New Zealand, so you've got that income, so that when you go to buy a house, you can show a bigger income." And that's exactly how it worked. I worked for Honeywell for I think 4 months after I got here remotely. This was before remote was a thing. um, and because of that, and I was able to prove that income, then we were able to afford a mortgage. Otherwise, we couldn't have gotten a house. We couldn't have bought a house.
Okay. So you raise a good point. Now, you're an American. How is it you can buy a house in another country?
Well, we have had a permanent residence visa since 1992.
Okay.
And because the word permanent's there, even though we went to Arizona for 11 years, um, whenever we would renew our passport, we would also renew our visa through the New Zealand embassy in New York, just so that we could come and visit sometime or whatever. And so, yeah, when we came back, we were still permanent residents and still had our permanent residence visa. And that means we can be just like a Kiwi. We can buy and sell property and get jobs and whatever.
The um, yeah, that's incredible. So you were able to purchase a home, and it's
Hmm.
the church is doing well. I've watched some of your videos. You stream it, and it's nice crowd. It looks like it's just you're having a great time. The Lord is blessing. Now I want to show this.
In the past 2.5 years, God has given us 15 new families.
Amen. Amen. Now I want to show you a picture because it's rough living over in New Zealand. If you watch that travel video, that link in the bottom, you'll see how bad it is. But here, when he gets hungry, all right, when he gets hungry, the Lord has provided for this man, and he just walks out his back door, and why is this not? There we go. And he doesn't even have a fishing pole. Do you see that, folks? That jumps up into his hands. That's all he has to do. And this, what is a brown speckled trout? And
It's a brand.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, they just jump out of the water. He's posted videos of you can see them in the creek. He just goes down there and they just surrender and come up and he just takes them home and eats them. So, I mean, it's just wonderful. Wonderful. That's
Of course,
by the way,
our,
do you have
our
to have a license? Do you have to have a license to do that?
you absolutely have to have a license, and the stream is fly fishing only, and it's a huge challenge because it's such a small creek. They definitely don't jump in my arms.
Oh my goodness. Now you mentioned washers and dryers. All right. This is the way I think. If I go to another country, and the only countries I've ever been to in my limited experience is Mexico and Canada. and I didn't really have time to do what I'm asking other people that visit other countries to do. But the washers and dryers, where are they made? Are they made in China, Asia, or are they made in the country? Or and as far as furniture goes,
The
I mean,
ones
do they
the ones
import
that
as
we
far as
have, or most of the those sorts of things are made here. Yeah.
they do make it do make it there? Well, that's wonderful.
Hmm.
More power to them. I actually this microphone that I'm speaking on, it's made by Rode. They're Australian, and
Yep.
this microphone is actually made in Australia. I own several pieces of their equipment. It's good stuff. But
Yep.
what I like
That's what
about
we
it,
use.
yeah, I've got the Rode Wireless 2 set, but that's the one reasons I buy it. They make good products and they make it in Australia. And I tell you, I don't like giving the communist Chinese. You have to. I've got a cell phone. I've got an Apple cell phone. And it's made in China. But if I can avoid it, I do at all cost. So that's fabulous. So I always thought the fish jumped in your hands. Okay, so I guess you actually have to work for it a little bit. But there's is the now right now. Let's see. You are in your summer. It's summer for you there, correct?
We're going. Yeah, we're going into summer.
Right, right. So December. What is the first day of winter? December 21st here would be the first day of summer there for you, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes it's wrap your head around that. And by the way, when the toilet flushes, does it actually go in reverse? We all want to know.
Not so much the toilet, but when you drain the water from the say a bathtub or whatever,
Okay.
the Coriolis effect is real, and yes, it does go the other direction.
Folks, this is why you watch the third rail. You get all the information. All right. We delve deep into the details. Okay. And wow. So, Shane, I tell you what, it's just a blessing to talk to you. And I'm a little disappointed. I have to say, I haven't gotten any invitations to come and fill in for you since you've been in New Zealand. I'm a little hurt by that, but I understand. But
But brother, if you ever
of
want to
course, I'm
visit,
joking.
you are welcome.
Yeah, yeah, of course. I would love to go to New Zealand and Australia. That would be just wow. I was sitting on a plane once coming back or going somewhere, and an Australian was sitting next to me, young man, and we were sitting there talking, and I made the comment, I always wanted to go and to Australia to visit, and he looked at me with that expression. He was thinking, well, you're an American. You can go anywhere you want. I mean, some people think all Americans are rich. I don't. Do New Zealanders think that? Do they think that we're all rich or something because we're Americans?
I guess to a point, people kind of get that impression because
Yeah.
our city is a big tourist city, and so the people that do come are people that obviously have money because the
Right.
flights aren't cheap and everything else is expensive.
Right.
But yeah, that's one thing that we learned a long time ago is we're here to win Kiwis to the Lord, and so we don't really talk about America. We don't try to promote America. We just
Sure.
talk about Jesus.
Amen. Amen. I'm going to put a link to your
And by the
church in
way,
the
we
description
are
as
Kiwis
well.
now.
I'm sorry. Say that again.
We have our citizenship now, so we're now citizens of both countries.
Oh, so did you have to apply for that, or is that because you've been there so long? Do they grant it to you automatically, or is there a process?
Well, no, you definitely have to apply for it. It's a big deal, but you can't apply for it until you have lived here uninterrupted for 5 years as a permanent resident.
Okay. Okay. Are there any perks to being a citizen? You can now vote, I guess. Maybe you couldn't do that before,
We could
but
vote as a permanent resident. The
oh, you
honest
could.
truth is, yeah, the truth is, and the medical is free either way. The truth is, it's our main reason for doing it was just to make it clear to the people that we're here to stay, but also the COVID thing just was the first time that the government made any delineation between the two. Um, it was the first time that there was a difference, like for people flying into the country, they treated permanent residents differently than they did citizens. And so we saw that as the writing on the wall that we don't want to ever have them kick us out, if you will,
Right.
as permanent residents. Even though the word permanent is there, we were still just residents. But now that we're citizens, that's it. You can't kick
That's it.
citizens out.
Well, amen. Amen. Shane, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me. It's been fascinating, and God bless you for your obedience to follow the Lord's leading in your life. And stay with us, and I'm going to do a closeout here, and I'll get back to you here in just a few minutes, okay?
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much. And so let me get this up here. Folks, thanks for watching this edition of The Third Rail. It's been great, and I'm going to put some links in the description below to his church and to that tourist video if you want to go to that area. It looks fascinating. I'd love to go, and it would be a nice place to go and visit. But thank you so much again for watching, and God bless you. Have a great day. Thank you.